I'm sure that your experience on the council makes you a good listener. And yes, it was going to be my next point that we've been stagnant for with job growth for 2 decades. So let's go to beyond revenue growth.
Right.
Where else do you see us getting control of the deficit?
Well, I think that to your other point, I think when we talk to companies in the Metro Hartford Alliance about job retention and job growth, and we ask what are the 2 biggest impediments, always are listed by almost, regardless of the size of the business, is that anti-business attitude I just mentioned, and then the cost of doing business in the state, the cost of living in the state. So we have to demonstrate to our residents and to our businesses that we're serious about getting those costs under control. Those costs fall in 4 big buckets: state taxes and fees, cost of energy, cost of health care insurance, and property taxes. And I don't think you have to address all 4 of them. But let's talk about state taxes and the state budget, because that is the biggest issue we've got facing us right now. $3.5 billion operating deficit we'll face July 1, a year from today, because of the one-time revenues that are in this budget that were used to plug a so-called balance the budget that won't be there July 1 of 11. So we have to focus on reducing our spending and restructuring government. And I'd say there are 2 big buckets we have to look at. One clearly is looking at how we manage Medicaid. The 2 largest elements of the budget are spending on health care and spending on state employee compensation. And I want to be clear that we're not looking to try to take things away, but we have to make sure that we're getting those costs under control. On the state compensation side, I've talked about the need to shrink the state workforce, either by eliminating positions, consolidating entities, or working with the unions to reduce the total amount of compensation that's being paid, which to me is unsustainable, particularly on the benefits side, where you're looking at employees under the current plan. If you work for 10 years for the state of Connecticut, you can achieve health care coverage at 55. A defined benefit concept that I think is unsustainable given the age at which people can retire and the relative richness depending on your last 4 years of compensation. Those are things that are extremely difficult to sustain, just like Social Security on the federal side, unless we make some substantial changes in terms of age of eligibility for collecting Social Security or means testing. Those are things that have to be looked at, and it's going to be critical that we get the unions to the table, that we get the Democratic legislators to the table to talk seriously about how we're going to make those adjustments.
I think you've got quite a challenge.
Well, you know about me, the one thing I'll say, Alex, this problem belongs to all 3.6 million of us. And I think what a governor needs to do is make sure that people understand the scope of the problem and get people to work together to resolve it.
That's a good start, I think. You're in a 3-way primary. Mike Fedeli and Tom Foley are your challengers. What differentiates you most from these candidates?
I think two things that I would point out to Alex, to you and the listeners. One is the relationships that I mentioned earlier, the extensive relationships that I've built up in the 17 years I've been here in the state. If you take Tom, for example, that his business experience has been essentially outside the state of Connecticut. The relationships that he's built have been, on the political side, have been much more at the national level as opposed to the local level. And I believe that understanding, knowing many personalities in the state, the leaders in the state, understanding some of the issues, how one part of the state differs from another that's not Connecticut, as small as it is, does have different personalities around depending on what part of the state you're in. I think that knowledge base is going to be very critical, not only to, as I say, winning in November, attracting those Democrats and independents that we're going to need, but working starting next January. I also think that I'm much more transparent than Tom. I'm prepared to put all the issues on the table, have people, I've made a release earlier this week that will have media availability, constituent availability on a regular basis, in part so that people, that I can communicate what I want to do on the policy side, but people can ask me about things that they want to know about my background or whatever it is they need. With respect to Mike, whom I have enormous respect for in terms of his service to the state, one big fundamental difference is that he's taking public financing and I'm not. I don't believe that public financing is a good use of taxpayer dollars. I think it reflects a fundamental difference in our approach to the way we'll govern. And I also believe the kind of experience that I've had throughout the state, not just to say in the southwestern part of the state where Mike has spent most of his business career, is significant. As I say, my knowledge of my interaction with people around the state, I think is much broader.
Very good. You described your 5-point plan for Connecticut.
Yes.
For government as a plan for a clean and open government.
Right.
And you know, transparency was the first point you brought up today.
Right.
I know you were critical of Tom Foley's lack of full disclosure about his arrest. Would you like to elaborate on your view?
Well, I think what I've said all along about this since it's come out in the last couple of days, I think as a candidate for governor in the state of Connecticut, and maybe this is true for all offices, but particularly for governor, you're asking people to elect you to be the leader of the state for 4 years. You're the person who's going to be looked to lay the ground, to lay the policy works out, the strategies, the tactics that are there. And I think that people want to know fully about all your experiences, the bad as well as the good. My point is, I think Tom should have put all this on the table last June. I mean, he's already made one switch from the Senate race to the governor's race. But certainly last June, he should have put all this on the table so it doesn't become a media circus. Rather, it's something that's out there. I have no interest in getting involved in Tom's personal life. I fully respect that. But an arrest is not a private matter. It's a matter of public record. And I think those are things that are where I differentiate myself, that says I have no problem. I know I'm running for office. I know that the people expect us to be transparent. You know, in this state, we've gone through a governor going to prison. We've gone through multiple mayors going to prison. There's a sense, I think, of cynicism that really needs to be addressed if we're going to have, if people are going to have confidence in their leadership. I think they're entitled to understand everything about their prospective leaders.
Well, then let's talk a bit. We talked about how you've differentiated yourself from your Republican challengers.
Right.
What do you see? How do you see yourself being differentiated from your Democratic or the Democratic nominee come November?
I think first and foremost, Alex, that the a Republican is going to whoever the Republican candidate is, I expect to be that person, is understanding the independence that you have from the state unions. The state unions have significant influence on the Democratic Party, certainly in the legislature. We're going to work very hard, all of us collectively, the town committee here, to elect as many Republicans to the Senate and the House as we possibly can. If you're a betting man, the odds are that the Democrats will still have majorities in both chambers. And so I think it's going to be very critical to demonstrate, that I will demonstrate as much respect for Dan Malloy or Ned Lamont, whoever the candidate is. In order to become that nominee, I believe there are certain understandings that you have with the state unions that I, as a Republican candidate, will not have. And this is not to say we're going to start off with an adversarial relationship with the state unions, but more of an arm's length relationships that are going to be necessary to doing that. I also think that the Republicans generally, notwithstanding some of the things that happened at the U.S. congressional level during the second Bush term, when it seemed like nobody cared about spending, I think by and large Republicans have a history of fiscal conservatism, understanding that you can't spend more than you earn, you don't borrow more than you can pay back. Those are things that we'll be demonstrating that we'll be campaigning on from August 11th on, and I think those will be two distinguishing factors between me and either Ned Lamont or Dan Malloy.
Great. You had, in your 5-point plan, you had talked a bit about breaking away from the defined benefit plan and going more with a defined contribution plan. Why don't you explain why you feel that's important?
Well, I think there are two things that I said in that release that I think are important to this conversation. One is that, broadly speaking, I've argued that we need to look hard at moving all state employees from a defined benefit to a defined contribution plan. And my principal reason for doing that is that what happens, and you're seeing it in this state all along, where we underfund the pension system, so that we're now looking at somewhere between a $50 to $70 billion unfunded liability that someone has to pay down the road. Being the simple soul that I am, a defined contribution plan has a distinct benefit of making the cost in the current biannual budget would go up, because you have to honor the contribution to the 401k or whatever the vehicle is you're using.